The village of Little Brackenford had always been a place where time seemed to move at a gentler pace than elsewhere in England. Tucked between rolling emerald hills and hedgerows gilded with wildflowers, it was the sort of place where one could still hear the clop of a milkman's cart at dawn, and where church bells marked the gentle passing of the day. And at the very heart of the high street, just opposite the green, stood Wellington's old bookshop, a quaint, oak-fronted establishment with windows that bowed slightly outward, as though heavy with the secrets of centuries. It was here early one drizzly October morning that Miss Jane Marple, visiting her distant cousin Charlotte, found herself sheltering from the misty rain. Charlotte had recommended the shop wholeheartedly, claiming it held the best selection of forgotten treasures anywhere in the county. Miss Marple, who had always found books to be a most revealing window into the human mind, entered with the serene curiosity that made her such a keen observer of human behaviour. Inside, the bookshop smelled of parchment, cedarwood, and a hint of lavender polish. Rows of uneven shelves were crammed with antiquarian volumes, leather-bound journals, and stacks of vintage periodicals. The warm glow of brass lamps illuminated drifting motes of dust like tiny golden worlds. Behind the front counter stood the owner, Mr. Edgar Wellington, a scholarly gentleman in his late 50s with thin silver spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. His hair, greyish and unruly, suggested a mind constantly occupied with thoughts more pressing than grooming. He greeted Miss Marple with a polite, if somewhat distant, smile and returned quickly to cataloguing a shipment of Victorian poetry. There were two other patrons inside, a Mrs. Prudence Hartwell, the vicar's wife, known for her strict adherence to propriety and her piercing glances that could unnerve even the stoutest parishioner. For Mr. Lionel Briggs, the village's eager but bumbling solicitor, who had an unfortunate habit of knocking things over whenever he moved too quickly. As Miss Marple perused a shelf of botanical guides, she couldn't help noticing a peculiar tension in the air. Mrs. Hartwell kept darting sharp glances toward the counter, her fingers drumming impatiently against a leather handbag. Mr. Briggs, meanwhile, drifted nervously about the aisles, pulling at his collar as though the bookshop were far too warm for his liking. Miss Marple had spent a lifetime observing human nature in its many peculiar manifestations, and she sensed, with the certainty born of long experience, that something unsaid was simmering beneath the surface. Her intuition proved accurate. A sudden crash from the back of the shop startled everyone. Mr. Wellington, looking quite pale, muttered an apology and hurried through the curtained doorway leading to the storeroom. Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure near the back, though it disappeared before she could make out more. Moments later, the bell above the door tinkled brightly as the postman entered, bringing with him a gust of cold wind and a parcel tied with rough twine. "For you, Mr. Wellington," he said cheerfully, placing it on the counter. The label bore the return address of a London auction house, but Mr. Wellington did not respond. In fact, he did not return at all. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. Hartwell began to mutter indignantly about poor customer service. Mr. Briggs adjusted his spectacles and glanced uneasily at the curtained door. Miss Marple, sensing the mounting disquiet, stepped gently toward the back. "Oh dear," she murmured, "I do hope Mr. Wellington is quite all right. That crash earlier sounded rather alarming, didn't it?" Before anyone could respond, a shrill scream echoed through the shop. It was Mrs. Hartwell. "Help! Someone call the constable! Mr. Wellington! He's not moving!" Miss Marple hurried behind the counter and through the heavy curtain. The storeroom was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb that flickered with every draught. Piled books formed small mountains around the cramped space, and lying amidst them on the dusty floor was Mr. Edgar Wellington, motionless, one hand clutching a torn scrap of paper. Miss Marple knelt beside him, touching his wrist with gentle precision. There was no pulse. "Dead," she whispered gravely. "And not by accident, I fear." Mrs. Hartwell, trembling, pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Mr. Briggs leaned against a crate, ashen and wide-eyed. "What do you mean? Not an accident?" he stammered. Miss Marple pointed to the position of the body, the unnatural angle of the neck, and the overturned step stool lying suspiciously far from where Mr. Wellington had fallen. "This was staged," she said softly. "Someone wanted it to look like a simple fall. But I believe we have stumbled upon something far more serious." The cold draught swept through the room once more, rustling the pages of scattered books like whispered secrets. Outside, the church bells chimed 11, an eerily serene contrast to the grim discovery inside Wellington's old bookshop. Miss Marple rose slowly, surveying the shocked faces of the others. "A murder," she said, "and I dare say, one committed by someone present in this very shop." If the atmosphere in Wellington's old bookshop had been tense before, it now thickened into something almost suffocating. Miss Marple, though outwardly composed, felt a faint tremor of sorrow for poor Mr. Wellington. Murder, even the quiet, methodical sort, had a way of unsettling the very air of a place. Constable Peter Aldridge, a young man with earnest eyes and an unfortunate tendency to underestimate the elderly, arrived promptly after being summoned by Mrs. Hartwell's quavering voice. Upon seeing Miss Marple standing near the body, he sighed inwardly. He had grown up hearing tales of her uncanny habit of being present at every strange occurrence within 50 miles. "Miss Marple," he said, removing his cap respectfully, "I shouldn't be surprised to find you here." She smiled serenely. "Dear Constable, I promise I had nothing to do with poor Mr. Wellington's demise." Aldridge cleared his throat awkwardly. "Of course not, ma'am. I didn't mean to imply, only, well, you do seem to have an eye for trouble." "Not trouble," she corrected gently. "Human nature. It tends to leave clues if you know how to look." Meanwhile, Mrs. Hartwell perched on a wooden crate, fanning herself dramatically, her face flushed. Mr. Lionel Briggs wrung his hands so aggressively it seemed he might twist his fingers into knots. Miss Marple took a moment to observe them quietly, as she had done so many times before. People always revealed more in silence. Constable Aldridge began taking statements. "P.R.s are to be old Chief wife. Mrs. Hartwell, when did you see Mr. Wellington last?" Aldridge asked. She straightened as though sitting for a formal portrait. "He was perfectly well when I arrived. He went to the back perhaps 10 minutes before the dreadful scream." "You didn't see anyone else go back there?" She hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but Miss Marple noticed. "There was a shadow," she admitted reluctantly, "but I assumed it was Mr. Briggs." Mr. Briggs nearly choked. "Me? I never went anywhere near the storeroom. I was browsing the legal section." Miss Marple watched carefully. Hartwell had always been known for her rigid standards, but beneath that veneer she sensed something else. Fear, yes, but perhaps something more personal. IRL Barigsta Celsior. Constable Aldridge turned his attention to him. "Mr. Briggs, you seem quite uneasy." "I always dislike unexpected situations," he muttered, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. "I came in only to collect a book I had ordered, a rare edition on property law." "And did you receive it?" Briggs swallowed. "Well, no. Wellington was about to fetch it when he went to the back." Miss Marple tilted her head. That small detail was interesting. Why had Mr. Wellington been cataloguing poetry if he had intended to fetch a client's order? Something didn't quite align. "Teach Baroque so austere use per cl." Before Constable Aldridge could proceed further, Miss Marple stepped toward the counter where the parcel from London still sat. "Constable," she said mildly, "I believe this package arrived mere minutes before Mr. Wellington disappeared. Might it be relevant?" Aldridge frowned. "I shouldn't open it without authorization." Miss Marple gave him a grandmotherly smile that had persuaded more stubborn men. "My dear boy, if a murderer is involved, the sooner we understand Mr. Wellington's recent dealings, the better." With a nervous sigh, he cut the twine. Inside was a beautifully bound 15th century manuscript, wrapped in soft cloth. Even Miss Marple inhaled softly at the sight. Mr. Briggs blinked. That looks frightfully valuable." "It is," Miss Marple replied, "and valuable objects have a curious way of inviting danger." Attached to it was a note. "Payment must be delivered by Friday. No delays this time." Miss Marple exchanged a thoughtful glance with Aldridge. That was no ordinary acquisition, and no delays suggested pressure, perhaps even blackmail. "T fouart h person." Miss Marple turned her attention to the front door. "Constable, is it possible someone slipped out unnoticed during the commotion?" Aldridge looked uncertain. "I didn't see anyone else." "But I did," Miss Marple said quietly. Just before the scream, Mrs. Hartwell stiffened. "You never mentioned anyone!" Miss Marple gave her a patient smile. "You were quite distraught, my dear, understandably so. But yes, I saw a figure in a dark coat leaving hastily. And that person did not ring the doorbell on their way out. That does rather complicate matters." Aldridge murmured. "Not really," Miss Marple said gently. It simply means we have a fourth subject of interest. Someone who wished to avoid being noticed. T.S. Garrop off par. She now turned to the torn scrap in Mr. Wellington's hand, which Aldridge had placed on the counter for examination. Miss Marple peered at the uneven edge. It appears to be part of a letter, she observed. The ink is fresh, likely written this morning. Only 3 words were visible. Can't forgive this. Miss Marple tapped her finger lightly. Such strong emotion. And usually, strong emotions stem from personal grievances. She turned toward Mrs. Hartwell, still trembling, yet visibly avoiding eye contact. And grievances. Miss Marple added softly, seldom one-sided. A CBLE Descovar. As Constable Aldridge gathered notes, Miss Marple quietly moved around the storeroom. On a narrow table, partially hidden behind a stack of dusty atlases, she noticed a second pair of reading spectacles. Delicate, gold-rimmed, and decidedly feminine. She held them up. Mrs. Hartwell, she said pleasantly, I believe these belong to you. Do they not? The vicar's wife turned as pale as parchment. I must have dropped them earlier, she stammered. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, not unkindly, but knowingly. Curious, she murmured, considering you claimed never to have gone into the storeroom at all. A quiet gasp travelled through the room. Miss Marple folded her hands. The truth always begins to peek through the smallest cracks. The air inside Wellington's old bookshop grew taut with unspoken accusations. Mrs. Hartwell, normally the picture of unwavering propriety, sat rigidly on the edge of a wooden stool, clutching her handbag as if it were a lifeline. Mr. Briggs continued pacing, shoulders hunched and lips pressed thin with anxiety. Constable Aldridge cast glances between them, clearly uncertain which thread to tug first. Miss Marple, observing quietly, recognized the scene for what it was, not simply grief or shock, but the shifting unease of secrets pressing dangerously close to exposure. And as she knew well, secrets in a small English village were never solitary. They intertwined like tangled vines, one pulling at another until the whole came undone. She began with the most fragile thread. THEVHRFUNDR, Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Marple said gently, may we speak plainly for a moment? I fear your omission of your presence in the storeroom is not the only detail you withheld. Mrs. Hartwell stiffened. I simply went in for a moment. I was searching for Mr. Wellington. It was terribly dark. I misplaced my spectacles. Miss Marple's expression remained kind but firm. My dear, you misplace things so rarely that you have been known to scold children for leaving hymnals askew. Surely you did not wander into a dark storeroom by chance. The vicar's wife faltered. I will admit, I went to speak with Mr. Wellington privately. Constable Aldridge perked up. About what, Mrs. Hartwell? She twisted her handkerchief. A personal matter. He had in his possession a book that belonged to the church archive, a volume of early sermons. I wished it returned quietly. One hates a fuss. Miss Marple nodded. A reasonable concern, but hardly one that inspires the words, I can't forgive this. Mrs. Hartwell blanched. I don't know anything about that note! Miss Marple didn't press further. She suspected Mrs. Hartwell's secret was real, but irrelevant to murder. Lowell Barigs a man on EDG. Miss Marple shifted her attention to Mr. Briggs. His earlier nervousness now appeared less the anxiety of innocence and more the agitation of someone with something to hide. Mr. Briggs, she said softly, you mentioned a book you came to collect, and yet I recall seeing your order slip on the counter, dated 2 weeks ago. Did you truly expect Mr. Wellington to have it ready today? Briggs's eyes widened. Well, you see You were not here for your book, she said kindly. You came because Mr. Wellington had summoned you. Mrs. Hartwell turned sharply. Summoned? For what purpose? Briggs's bravado crumbled. It was a small, financial matter. Miss Marple lifted a brow small. Very well, significant, he confessed miserably. I owe Mr. Wellington a sum of money. I thought he wanted to discuss repayment, but when I arrived he was terribly on edge. He said he needed the funds urgently. And did he tell you why? Miss Marple asked. No, only that it was a matter of protection. Miss Marple exchanged a look with Aldridge. Protection could mean almost anything, though rarely something benign. Avicito h arom Rome. Miss Marple moved back into the main section of the shop. She wanted to see it anew, not as a customer, but as a crime scene. Books lay scattered. Chairs were slightly misaligned. A faint scent lingered in the air, something sharp, metallic, and oddly out of place. She traced it to a low shelf. There she found a tiny glass vial, no larger than her thumb, empty. Aldridge crouched beside her. "Poison, do you think?" "Perhaps," she said, "but if so, not administered here." Mr. Wellington collapsed in the storeroom. "This," she held up the vial. "This is a message. Someone was careless, or someone wanted us to believe poison was used." "A red herring, a deliberate mislead. Good heavens," muttered Aldridge. "Why would someone plant a false clue?" "To buy time," Miss Marple murmured. "Or to point suspicion away from themselves." She placed the vial gingerly into a handkerchief. "Tici mestiraeus for UIH person." Miss Marple now returned to the central question who had slipped out. "I saw the figure leave," she told Aldridge. "Tall, wearing a dark overcoat. I could not make out the face, but the stride was confident, purposeful." Mrs. Hartwell shivered. "Could it have been someone from the auction house? Perhaps they followed the manuscript." "It's possible," Miss Marple replied. "Rare books fetch remarkable sums. But I do not believe this was a random criminal. The timing is too precise." Mr. Briggs nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes! Someone must have known he'd be alone in the storeroom." Miss Marple studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Briggs, you seem rather eager to direct suspicion towards strangers." Briggs swallowed. "Avis." Suddenly, the bell above the door chimed. All heads turned. Standing in the doorway, shaking off the rain, was a young woman of striking presence. Mid-20s, dark-haired, wearing a tailored navy coat. She hesitated as she saw the somber expressions. I'm looking for Edgar Wellington," she said quietly. "I'm his daughter, Clara." A collective silence swept the shop daughter. None of them had known Mr. Wellington had family. Miss Marple was the first to recover. "My dear, I'm afraid there's been a terrible incident." Clara's face drained of colour. No, he wrote me this morning. He said he had something important to tell me." Miss Marple's senses sharpened. "Did he mention what?" Clara reached into her pocket and produced a letter. "Creased from travel." "He said he was being threatened," she whispered, "and that he feared someone close to him." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Miss Marple unfolded the note carefully. Though brief, it was revealing. "I must see you. Someone here means me harm. I have discovered something I cannot ignore." Miss Marple looked up slowly. The list of suspects had changed, the stakes had risen, and the truth, she felt, was buried somewhere very close, hidden behind deception, fear, and a secret Mr. Wellington died trying to reveal. The sudden arrival of Clara Wellington cast a new, chilling shadow over the cramped bookshop. Miss Marple watched the young woman carefully, not with suspicion, but with the perceptive sympathy of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating the pain behind human behaviour. Clara stood very still, holding her father's letter as though afraid that letting go would sever her last connection to him. Constable Aldridge cleared his throat gently. "Miss Wellington, may I ask when your father sent you that note?" "Early this morning," she replied. "It arrived via special courier. I came straight from London. He asked me to meet him here. He said he had uncovered something dangerous." Miss Marple stepped closer, her tone warm. "My dear, have you any notion what he feared?" Clara hesitated. "Only that it concerned a manuscript. One he shouldn't have acquired. He said someone would go to great lengths to retrieve it." Miss Marple glanced at the parcel on the counter. The priceless 15th century manuscript wrapped in cloth. A puzzle piece slid neatly into place. But others remained scattered. She returned to the storeroom where Mr. Wellington's body had been found, her eyes tracing the layout with meticulous care. The overturned step stool, the place where the manuscript had been set, the faint scuff marks on the floor. She knelt again, not over the body but over a faint, recently disturbed patch of dust. "Constable," she said, "shine your torch here." Aldridge obeyed. The beam revealed a set of parallel indentations, the unmistakable marks left by someone dragging a heavy object. Miss Marple nodded to herself. Mr. Wellington struggled. He was confronted here, likely while holding the manuscript. Aldridge frowned. "But he died of a broken neck. That suggests a fall." "A fall? Yes," Miss Marple said softly, "but a forced one." She stood, moving toward the narrow window at the back of the storeroom. It was open a mere inch. Enough for someone to see, enough for someone to pass something through. She studied the latch. It bore fresh scratches. "This window was opened recently," she murmured, "and not from the inside." CRS-TRH. Returning to the front room, Miss Marple found Clara standing apart, staring blankly at a shelf of Dickens novels. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "You mentioned your father obtained something he should not have. May I ask, was it this manuscript?" Clara nodded reluctantly. "Yes. Father purchased it quietly, without informing the auction house he bid through. He believed someone within the auction circuit was engaged in fraud, selling forged documents as originals. He thought this manuscript proved it." Miss Marple's eyes brightened with comprehension. "And did he tell anyone else?" "No, he wanted to expose them, but he feared retaliation." Mrs. Hartwell gasped. "Retaliation? In our village?" Miss Marple gave her a calm look. "Crime does not concern itself with boundaries, Mrs. Hartwell." Clara wiped her eyes. Feather said a man had been following him. A tall man in a dark overcoat. A quiet, collective shiver moved through the room. "Tibo o kahatka a tr obeli." Miss Marple picked up the manuscript again, unwrapping the cloth carefully. It was a lavishly illustrated devotional manuscript, gold-leafed, handwritten, pristine. Too pristine. She held a page to the light. Aldridge leaned over her shoulder. "What are you looking for?" "A flaw," she whispered. "Even the most skilled forgers leave traces." Her eyes narrowed. There, it was faint, barely visible. A tiny speck of modern ink residue, the kind that did not exist in the 15th century. "This manuscript," Miss Marple said softly, "is a forgery. A remarkably good one, but a forgery nonetheless." Mr. Briggs nearly collapsed. "Forgery, but it's worth tens of thousands of pounds?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, "which is precisely why an accomplished criminal might murder to keep its secret hidden." Clara looked stunned. Father suspected as much. He must have confronted the wrong person. Tesson Rysisk. Miss Marple turned toward the suspects, Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Briggs, and Clara herself, studying their faces, their posture, the tremor of their hands. "Constable Aldridge," she said quietly, "what do we know of Mr. Wellington's recent interactions?" Aldridge consulted his notebook. He'd been visited by a representative from the London auction house 3 times this month. A man named Mr. Fostel. "Dark coat? Convenient," Miss Marple murmured. Mrs. Hartwell swallowed. "Do you suppose this Mr. Foster is the one who slipped out before I screamed?" "I do," Miss Marple replied calmly. "He was here to retrieve the manuscript, and to silence Mr. Wellington." "But why come here today?" Briggs asked. Miss Marple's eyes glinted. "Because Mr. Wellington sent the letter. Clara was not the only one he wrote to." "Oh heavens," whispered Mrs. Hartwell. "Tie lotara diashna Genevanes." Miss Marple returned to the torn scrap found in Mr. Wellington's hand. "I can't forgive this. That does not sound like a note from a villain, but from a victim." She placed the scrap next to Clara's letter. The edges matched. Clara's knees weakened. "Feather wrote that before he died." "No, my dear," Miss Marple said tenderly, off deliberately. "But why?" "Because he wanted us to see only those words," Miss Marple said softly. A clue pointing to the person he suspected. Someone close enough to betray him. Someone he could not forgive. She turned the pieces, aligning their edges to restore the rest of the sentence. It read, "I can't forgive this, because I trusted you, Clara." The room fell silent. Clara stepped back, shocked. No, he misunderstood. I warned him about the auction house. I begged him not to confront them alone, but he didn't listen. He thought I was trying to stop him from uncovering the truth." Miss Marple touched her arm gently. "Not accusing you, my dear, warning you, telling you of his fear." Clara trembled. "Then who did this to him?" Miss Marple turned slowly, her expression solemn, her deduction complete. "I believe I know who murdered Edgar Wellington." And the truth, she knew, would shock everyone in the room. A hush settled over the bookshop, as though the old beams and dusty shelves themselves were leaning in, waiting for Miss Marple's judgment. Rain pattered steadily against the windows, a quiet rhythm beneath the rising tension inside. Constable Aldridge glanced nervously between the suspects. Mrs. Hartwell clutched her handbag so tightly her knuckles blanched. Mr. Briggs trembled, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Clara stood frozen, her father's incomplete letter still in her hand. Miss Marple touched the rim of her lace glove thoughtfully. "Let us review what we know," she began, her voice calm, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. "Mr. Wellington was killed in his own storeroom. There was a struggle, but no evidence of poison, despite the conveniently placed vial. The manuscript he received this morning is a forgery. He feared someone close to him, and a tall man in a dark coat slipped out just moments before his body was discovered." She walked slowly toward the center of the room, positioning herself where the lamplight fell warmly over her. "This murder is not merely about a book," she continued. "It is about deception and desperation." Constable Aldridge swallowed. "Miss Marple, who do you believe killed him?" Miss Marple turned her soft blue eyes toward Mr. Lionel Briggs. He froze. "Me," he squeaked. "Miss Marple, that is outrageous! I may have owed him money, but murder—" Miss Marple smiled gently. "My dear Mr. Briggs, I did not say you killed him." Briggs sagged with relief, temporarily. Miss Marple then shifted her gaze to Mrs. Prudence Hartwell, the vicar's wife. She stiffened like a startled bird. "Miss Marple, surely you don't believe I could commit such a vile act?" "You," Miss Marple said kindly, "are the reason to lie. Your spectacles hidden in the storeroom suggest you met Mr. Wellington privately. But your motive concerned only a church book, an unfortunate breach of propriety, not murder." Mrs. Hartwell exhaled shakily. Clara watched tense. "Then who?" Miss Marple's eyes, clear as crystal, now fixed on Clara Wellington herself. Clara gasped. No, please! "I loved my father. I came to help him." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "You did. And you were not the one who killed him." Clara nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Hartwell whimpered. "Miss Marple, for pity's sake, who is left?" Miss Marple took a slow breath. "The murderer," she said softly. "It's not in this room." A collective shudder swept through the shop. Constable Aldridge frowned. "But you said you knew." "Yes, Constable," Miss Marple interrupted gently. "The murderer slipped out before any of us could stop him. But he left behind traces, a great many of them." She approached the counter and lifted the manuscript, its gold leaf pages shimmering under the lamplight. "This forgery was masterfully done," she explained, "but forgery requires materials, special inks, paper treated with certain compounds, and most importantly, someone with access to the original texts for reference." She folded the manuscript carefully. Such a person would be close to the auction circuits. Someone skilled, confident, able to move freely between buyers and sellers without suspicion. Aldridge blinked. "You mean the auction house representative?" Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, Mr. Foster, the tall man in the dark overcoat. The man Mr. Wellington had confronted about forged manuscripts. The man who visited this shop several times this month. The man who stood to lose everything if he were exposed." Clara trembled. "He killed Father because Father discovered the forgery." "Exactly." Miss Marple's voice was sombre. "Mr. Foster came today to retrieve the manuscript and silence Mr. Wellington before he could speak. He lured him into the storeroom under the pretext of a private discussion. There was a struggle. Mr. Wellington fell, or was pushed, with enough force to break his neck." Constable Aldridge clenched his fists. "And the vial?" "A red herring," Miss Marple replied. "Mr. Foster placed it deliberately to mislead us into believing poison was involved. But he did not account for the lighting in this old shop. Lamps create shadows, and shadows reveal what they were meant to hide." Aldridge blinked. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple pointed toward the dusty shelf where she had found the vial. There were 2 sets of footprints near that shelf. One belonging to Mr. Wellington, and a second, heavier pair, but only one set led away. The other set stopped abruptly, meaning the man who set the vial down never walked out by the front door. Aldridge frowned. "Then how?" "The back window," Miss Marple said. "I found fresh scratches on its latch. Mr. Foster escaped through the alleyway long before we realized what had happened." Briggs stammered. But why didn't Mr. Wellington call for help? Why didn't we hear anything?" Miss Marple folded her hands. "Because it happened very quickly. And Mr. Wellington, dear man, was elderly. A strong shove, delivered abruptly, would have been fatal." She turned back to Clara. "Your father knew he was in danger. He wrote to you not to accuse you, but to warn you. He suspected Mr. Foster, and in those final moments, he tore that letter to draw attention to his last conscious thought, that he had been betrayed by someone he trusted." Clara sobbed quietly. Miss Marple touched her shoulder with grandmotherly warmth. "My dear, your father died trying to protect the truth. And thanks to his courage and your letter, we now know who is responsible." She faced Constable Aldridge. "You must telegraph the London authorities immediately. Mr. Foster will try to flee, but he will not get far. His crimes are many, and his arrogance has finally caught up with him." Aldridge nodded sharply, determination replacing his earlier uncertainty. "I'll see to it at once." As he hurried out, the tension in the room slowly ebbed. Mrs. Hartwell whispered a prayer. Mr. Briggs mumbled apologies to no one in particular. Clara turned to Miss Marple. "How can I ever thank you?" Miss Marple smiled, gentle, calm, timeless. "Oh, my dear, no thanks are needed. When one observes human nature long enough, the truth becomes quite persuasive. And murder, I'm afraid, never hides well. Not in a village such as ours." With the mystery unravelled and justice set on its course, Miss Marple took one last, quiet look around the old bookshop. Though sorrow lingered, peace was beginning to settle once more, and outside, as the rain finally lightened over Greenfield Hollow, the village breathed again.